General Jeffrey Rosen to look at claims of fraud in the 2020 election. One email requested the DOJ investigate a fantastical theory that people in Italy had used military technology and satellites to remotely tamper with voting machines in the U.S. and switch votes for Trump to votes for Joe Biden. The Times reports none of the emails show Rosen agreeing to open the investigation suggested by Meadows, and former officials and people close to him said that he did not do so. Let's bring in the author of that report, Justice Department reporter for the New York Times, Katie Benner. She's also an MSNBC contributor. Katie, what more can you tell us? And I mean, are there any laws broken here?
I'm not really sure that we saw laws broken. We definitely saw policies violated. It's the Justice Department context policy with the White House is very clear that when it comes to matters of enforcement, no one from the White House, really, except for perhaps the White House counsel, is supposed to be talking to the Attorney General or the Justice Department. And that is in order to keep it from seeming like, or keep it from being in reality, an attempt by the White House to use investigations and to use enforcement as political cudgels against enemies, or as political tactics, for example, to try to legitimize a conspiracy theory that former President Trump won the election. So you saw that policy very clearly violated here. And then you also saw an attempt by the White House to legitimize, through the Justice Department, some pretty crazy conspiracy theories, which is interesting because there was a sense at the end of the administration within the White House, as people scrambled to find a way to say that they'd won, that it would be key for the Justice Department to somehow use its authority to bless these theories and to bless these tactics and say that there was a chance, when the Justice Department already determined there was none, that there was a chance that Trump had won.
Katie, Mark Meadows denied ever sending these. What's your response to his denial?
You know, I didn't hear that he had denied them. All I had been told vaguely was that he might not have remembered them. But the problem is that they are in possession of investigators for the House and the Senate. So I'm not really sure how that denial squares with Congress's possession of his emails.
With reality, actually, Charlie. And, of course, there was a disconnect, Charlie, with reality, obviously, inside the White House, a huge disconnect. And, my God, if American democracy was not hanging by a thread, it would be pretty damn funny that an idiot chief of staff was actually pushing Italygate, a conspiracy theory that satellites and a man from Italy came over and changed enough ballots to elect a president. By the way, anybody that read Elena Platt's Sunday New York Times cover story about the GOP in Texas knows that even Allen West mocked people who believed in Italygate. And yet, here we are to actually. I've got to straighten up here because Mika's going to get mad at me, Charlie. I'm sorry for laughing at the beginning of this question because it really was so damn dangerous that these people were actually controlling the lever of powers in the last several months of the Trump administration.
Yeah, I mean, think about what we're talking about here, Joe. We are talking about the chief of staff to the president of the United States in the final days of the presidency, trying to find a way to overturn a presidential election by embracing some of the most bizarre conspiracy theories you can imagine. You know, words fail. I mean, I've run out of. I need to get back to the thesaurus. You know, delusional, deranged, crazy. This is the Republicans' doom loop of crazy, and they are caught in it. That every time you think you come up with an idea that is just too lunatic, what happens is you find out that the president of the United States himself is embracing it, and then he spreads it out, and other people feel the need to act on it. And so here we are on this Monday morning. We're talking about, you know, the possibility, of Italygate. The president apparently had spent time musing about the possibility of being reinstatement. And we have to actually have explainers saying, by the way, no, you cannot be reinstated as president in August. I mean, really, we are talking about this. We're talking about this because these crazy notions have been circulating in the White House, in the Republican Party. And, as I've said, Joe, just because an idea is fake and ludicrous does not mean that it is not dangerous. And if millions of people believe this, it can create more anger, more outrage, and it can fuel the kinds of things that we saw on January 6th. So it's not just one big lie. It's the big lie metastasizing into new forms, and they can be very, very dangerous to American democracy.
Well, it's the Russian fire hose of falsehood, which is a very deliberate attempt to spread so many lies, and the lies don't have to be consistent with each other, that you confuse, you overwhelm, and people like me laugh at such ludicrous lies, thinking nobody would be stupid enough to believe them, and, well, actually tens of millions of people do believe them.